Hello and welcome to the March edition of On the Horizon, our monthly podcast dedicated to helping you navigate through the tricking world of golf course turf maintenance by helping you to look and think a little further forward. I'm Henry Bestley from ICL.
And I'm Glenn Kirby from Syngenta. It's March, Henry, and after you recently upped your poetry game, while sat at the airport, I decided to write a proper poem.
Oh, well done, Glenn. Which airport was it?
Malaga, Henry. Tom of Use Your Prism and Set Your Mower Up Good and Proper, that famous podcast. He dropped me off about 5 hours early at Malaga, and battery ran out on my laptop, so I crafted out a piece of poetry.
How exciting.
I did that just in case you came up with anything good this month.
Well, that is unlikely. But go on then, Glenn. What have you got?
Okay, here we go. Spring weather wild, greens firm and tight. Teas warm. Warm? Not teas warm, it's too cold for that. I'm going to go ahead. Okay, here we go, Henry. Spring weather wild, greens firm and tight. Teas worn, drying winds could well bite. We strive, persist, never done. For the love of turf, we soldier on.
Very good, Glenn. From the romantic school, I think there. I was getting a real sense of determination there.
Thank you. About 3 hours of thinking, what does March feel like in poetry?
Very good. Self-expression, Glenn. Can't beat it. Anyway, and look, I know I said that I was giving up on this particular malarkey, but I couldn't resist. And so I thought I would give it one more try, Glenn.
I knew you would, and I'm really pleased. So come on then, let's hear it.
Thanks, Glenn. So I'm calling this my March rival. See what I did there, Glenn?
Nice.
March rival, yes. So, right, must concentrate, I must emote. So, will the easterlies be harsh, or the ground start to parch, maybe turn into a marsh? So will we take heart, or should we beware the new moon of March?
So many questions, Henry.
I know.
I'm a bit spooky at the end as well.
I know. I can't resist a bit of echo.
I'm not sure we can describe that as an improvement, can we?
No, I've gone red. Anyway, I just don't seem to be able to grasp it, do I? I don't know what to do. Do you think I might do better with a limerick style, Glenn?
It's got to be worth a go, Henry.
Yeah, I think so. So one more go next month. And so with that in mind, Glenn, do you think you could research the weather in April for Nantucket?
Should we crack on?
Yes, best let's, because I am sure there will be plenty for us to contend with in March.
There certainly is, Henry.
Okay, Glenn, let's start with the weather, which we do every month, because it can help us to get our heads in the right place agronomically. So, where are you taking us this month to make sure that we are all properly briefed?
Well, Henry, this month, because I ran out of ideas and not a lot happens in March.
Well, there's mad hares, of course, Glenn.
Well, apart from mad hares.
Well, and St. Patrick's Day, which would be a biggie, I would think.
Yeah, but that's just Ireland.
Not really, Glenn. The whole world seems to jump in on that particular malarkey.
Yeah, well, I know that, but I can't do the weather for every pub in the country that sells Guinness, can I?
No.
Clearly, that wasn't going to work. Interesting idea. But because I was lacking any other inspiration when I was preparing for this, I thought I might start with places beginning with the letter A.
Ooh.
And then next month, I'd move on to places that begin with B.
Well, it's got to be to do with the low light levels, Glenn. I think you'll probably get your mojo back when the sun comes out.
Do hope so, because it didn't work out very well. I started with Avonmore in Scotland, so that's where we're going to go. Then we're going to go to Anglesey in Wales. And then I got stuck and I could only think of Andover. So I've given up already and I've gone to Reading in England and Lahinch in Ireland.
Oh, dear. So, well, look, not to worry, though, because maybe this month's theme, Glenn, could be places.
Yes, Henry. This month I've chosen some places.
Great idea, Glenn. And so, as always, we start with the general moisture situation. And if I remember, last month we were saying that on balance, we would probably all still be experiencing a net moisture gain in February, with rainfall exceeding evapotranspiration. But it could be a break-even month for some places every now and again. So how is the recent climatic record looking for March, Glenn?
Well, on average, many places now in March are beginning to dry out and others not. We've got some wetter areas of the country too. But when we're thinking about these figures, Henry, we're thinking about net moisture losses, which is simply an equation of rainfall minus evapotranspiration. So this is the figure we're talking about today. But when we're talking about this, you need to think about your own particular soil type. They are all different, so we are never starting in the same place in the spring.
Okay, so why is that then?
Well, all soils will have different water holding properties and they'll all be slightly different.
Okay, and of course those individual site characteristics will make a huge difference. So for our chosen places this month, have you got any numbers for us, Glenn?
Yes, I do. So we'll start in Aviemore in Scotland. They have a net average moisture situation of break even, with a dry year being around 49 millimetres less rain than evapotranspiration, and a wet one coming out of March about 60 millimetres wetter than when they started.
Wow, so that's potentially not bad, is it, on average?
No, not bad at all. Anglesey over in Wales, on average they are 37 millimetres wetter at the end of the month in a wet year. In a dry year, they're about 26 millimetres drier. And worst case scenario, about 147 millimetres wetter.
Yeah, so Wales are still not getting the breaks, are they, in March?
No, it's really tough over there for them. Reading in England, on average, about 20 millimetres drier at the end of the month. The driest scenario they've seen in recent years, they were 49 millimetres drier. And a worst case scenario for them in recent years, 32 millimetres wetter.
So that might not be too bad either.
No, that one's quite dry, close to me, and that's my feeling about March as well. Okay, so last on our list of places, Lahinch over in Ireland, and they on average are 51 millimetres wetter at the end of the month. A dry year for them is about 16 millimetres drier, and a wet year for Lahinch, west coast of Ireland, 160 millimetres wetter at the end of the month than when they started.
Ouch. So that one is that is wet, isn't it? And so I would think that it would be unlikely to be dry during March for them, Glenn.
The reason I brought up Lahinch and I kind of went there is because myself and Dan were over at Lahinch a few weeks back, and we just called in there for lunch as we had to wait before we flew out of Shannon Airport, and we both wanted to visit a bit of an Irish classic before we left. Of course, I was with you beforehand, and Coleman had recommended the chowder, which
I bet was really good.
Well, it should have been, but it wasn't because I didn't have it. No, forget the chowder for now. We were just desperate to get out on the golf course for a bit of an agronomic stroll, but it was absolutely dolloping it down outside. It was miserable out there, Henry. So we decided to simply have a fish pie instead because the chowder was off the menu.
Oh, was it? Well, I bet that was good anyway.
Oh, the fish pie was amazing. It was massive, but incredibly tasty. So I had my fish pie, waited for a break in the rain, and when it came, we grabbed it and we went out for a walk in the rain-free but very windy, gorgeous links of Lahinch. And having sat there seeing all that rain coming in, smashing against the window, running out of the gutters, I was just gobsmacked by how dry and firm the golf course was out there. Now, Lahinch is a piece of land that's been sent by the golfing gods, and it's absolutely stunning. But the walk around made me realise just how important those soils are. Now, of course, they need to be maintained in the correct fashion, cared for, tended for in the appropriate manner, keep organic matter low, all of those really important things like Lahinch is. But that amount of rainfall would have done for most parkland sites, Henry, and probably meant course closed for a few days after the kind of rain event we witnessed. But Lahinch was just rock solid. It was amazing, Henry. So whilst walking around, I thought this is just a really important factor that we don't talk about much, and that's field capacity, the soil's ability to hold water, and therefore the starting point going into spring. So these net moisture figures are really, really useful, but they're only part of the equation. Soil properties are another incredibly important part of this picture.
Yeah, of course. And we always need to factor in the rainfall figures into our own situation and our own site characteristics. But it looks like we might start to dry out in certain areas in March, doesn't it? Okay, so what are the chances of us having a wet March?
Okay, in these figures, I'm looking at months with a net moisture gain of 20 millimetres in the month as a level for a wet one. So not particularly wet, Henry, but 20 millimetres more rainfall than we've seen evapotranspiration. Okay, up in Aviemore in Scotland, 2 out of the last 13 years, they have seen more than 20 millimetres net gain.
Okay.
Anglesey in Wales, 10 out of the last 13 have been a net gain. Reading in England, 2 out of the last 13 have been a net gain of more than 20 millimetres in March. And Lahinch over in Ireland, 8 out of the last 13 have been a net gain of more than 20 millimetres.
Right, so big differences going on there depending on location. But for the inland or more easterly locations, it seems likely that they will begin to dry out a bit in March. And it looks like from those figures, there's maybe an 80% chance of a drying March. But by how much would depend on those site characteristics that you were talking about. And I suppose that these conditions may even be trending towards genuinely dry conditions if it's a dry site in a dry area. But in those wetter areas on the west coast, like in Anglesey and Lahinch, the likelihood is that they'll still be getting wetter. There's such variability across the UK and Ireland at this time, isn't there? It's really good that we sort of do take a broader look at different places.
Yeah, there's definitely variability in there, but there is also a pattern, across the whole area. ET in March begins to ramp up. So although it's variable all over the place, we're seeing the same shape in that kind of evapotranspiration pattern. Most places are now between 40 and 50 millimetres of moisture loss, with some areas in some years exceeding 60 millimetres of moisture loss through evapotranspiration. And so for the low rainfall areas, that means we now move into this deficit where ET exceeds rainfall and likely drying out with extended periods of no rain being possible. In fact, it's quite likely for those drier areas in the month of March.
Very good. So it feels like we might have turned a corner and be moving towards some better ground conditions, for the lucky ones at least. All right, moving on. So what about the temperatures in March? Are we warming up yet?
Well, yes, we are. We can experience some warmer temperatures now, but we can also experience some low ones too. So if we look at the extremes, Aviemore in Scotland, they've seen highs of 19 in March, but they've also seen lows of -7 degrees. Anglesey over in Wales, highs of 20 degrees in March, lows of -4. Reading, closer to me, down in the south, highs of 22 degrees in March, lows of -3.5. And Lahinch over in Ireland has experienced highs of 19.5 with lows of -7.
Okay. So all over the place then. It feels like the dreaded influence of those easterlies with those lows, doesn't it, Glenn? And I think it was Charles Dickens, Glenn, I've just pulled that one out of my sleeve, who said that March can be summer in the light and winter in the shade, which is really good. I think that sums it up, doesn't it? So he was tuned into this kind of sort of early lottery with the weather.
Mm-hmm. And will we be talking great golfer expectations later on?
Oh, very, very good, Glenn. But there were some huge differences in temperature in there, weren't there? Yeah, that we might have to contend with. So, that takes a bit of getting your head round, doesn't it? So we generally at this stage move to the average temperatures, don't we? Because they're usually a bit more helpful when trying to sort of, get our heads in the right place. So what are the day and nighttime averages through March, Glenn?
Okay, let's go back to our list of places. Aviemore in Scotland, daytime temperature averaging 7.5 degrees. Overnight, they're averaging 0.5 degrees. If we go over to Anglesey in Wales, they are averaging 9.7 degrees during the day, and overnight 3.5 degrees. Moving down to Reading in England, average daytime temperature 11.5 degrees with an overnight temperature of 3 degrees. And Lahinch in Ireland, daytime average 10.5, overnight average 3.4 degrees.
Okay, so generally sitting cold overnight and not, particularly warm during the day, but actually not too bad, are they? But it's those sort of nighttime temperatures, isn't it, that have really got a grip on things, isn't it, to hold back the onset of consistent growth, I think. And of course, we spoke about the occurrence of those intermittent growth waves, didn't we, last month? And we hope that, they will start coming in with increasing frequency and be substantial at this time to allow growth to start picking up and for us to get on with things. Is there any way of predicting the number and the magnitude and the duration of those waves?
Not really. I wish there was, but February and March are pretty unpredictable for those waves of growth. But they're certainly possible, and pretty likely we're going to get some of them and some periods of decent growth, which could be short or they could be long, but we need to be ready to grab them if and when those opportunities do come our way.
Yes, indeed, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. Okay, so what about day length and light levels during March?
Well, the clocks go forward at the end of March.
Yeah, which is something to look forward to.
That moment that a bit of optimism kicks in and delivers a brief spell of false hope that a break is on the way. But April and May, they can still drag, can't they?
Yes, they can, and we need to be aware of that, don't we?
Yeah, look, day lengths start the month at around 10.5 hours of daylight in Scotland, and we finish March at about 13 hours of daylight in Scotland. So reasonable length of day by the end of the month, and you can add about 40 minutes onto that once you move down to the south coast.
Okay, so things start to move in a positive direction in March, potentially.
Yeah, we definitely do move on from a light point of view, but temperature advancement, maybe not quite as much. It's possible, but it is definitely not guaranteed.
Okay, but still a step in the right direction. Okay, right. Talk me through the leaf wetness hours and those sub 2 degree stopping hours that we've been talking about. And these are the factors that help us get our heads around the level of microdochium patch disease risk, aren't they? For me, Glenn, March isn't a month that feels like we're likely to get into too much trouble with microdochium patch, fingers crossed. And I'm hoping, Glenn, that the figures will show us all why.
Yes, indeed. It's those sub 2 degree hours that we're relying on to stop the onslaught of microdochium patch because it doesn't like moving at those low temperatures. And longer periods of leaf wetness mean it has more opportunities to advance. So in order to stop or slow microdochium at this time of year, we're hoping for more sub 2 degree hours and less hours of leaf wetness. And if we go to Aviemore in Scotland, we're starting to see that from last month. We've got 6.5 hours now, on average, of sub 2 degree hours per day, and 6.5 hours of leaf wetness. So it's good news.
Yeah, that is a way better balance than we were seeing in January and February. We've still got those low temperatures, but a lot less leaf wetness to contend with. And so the microdocium patch disease pressure should be a lot lower for them, certainly in March.
Okay, let's pop up to Anglesey in Wales. 8.25 hours of leaf wetness a day on average, and about 1 hour a day of sub 2-degree hours.
Okay, so not so good over there in the northwest, but at least those leaf wetness hours are coming down from the 9 to 10 hours that we were seeing in February, so still better.
That's right. Reading in England, they are seeing around 5 hours a day of leaf wetness and about 2.5 hours a day of sub 2-degree hours.
Now that seems to be a lot better, doesn't it? It's colder, I suppose, and there's less leaf wetness going on at this time, which will hopefully play itself out in reality.
That's right. Lahinch over in Ireland, they are seeing on average nearly 8 hours a day of leaf wetness and about 1 hour 45 a day of sub 2-degree hours.
So it might not be great for everyone then, Glenn. The West Coast guys are probably still in the thick of things there with their sort of leaf wetness, quite high levels of leaf wetness and not too many sub 2-degree stopping hours.
Yeah, that's right. It is still very much a pressure situation for them, but this may be the lowest point of microdocium patch pressure that they reach, though.
Yeah, that is a fair point, isn't it? I mean, they do get it tough over there, don't they? So it might be a break of sorts. Okay, so before we move on, March is a time when we all start to look at soil temperatures, as they are one of the drivers for the onset of growth and recovery.
Yes, and the first thing to note, Henry, is how those soil temperatures fluctuate and mirror air temperature. I think there used to be a perception that soil temperatures were very stable and didn't move much, which I believe is true at depth. But in managed amenity root zones in the top 1 centimetre down to 10 centimetres, that can fluctuate a fair amount. And since that's where our roots are, that's what's going to influence the turf growing patterns. We have digital soil temperature probes that measure the temperature every 15 minutes now, and we can see that it does follow air temperature quite closely. I suspect the older style of thermometers that we placed in the ground and only read once a day have done a lot to compound that older style of thinking. So it's an interesting one. But we can pick out averages.
Okay.
And the soil temperature averages in Aviemore in Scotland in March tend to sit at around 4.5 degrees.
Okay, so on average, those soil temperatures look to be too low for growth on average. I think we're looking for, 6, 7, 8, 9 degrees, aren't we? Obviously the higher the better. But with those fluctuations that you mentioned, coming with a wave of milder conditions, fingers crossed, might quickly give things a lift, actually, mightn't it? And for long enough to see things start to move for them.
Indeed. So Anglesey in Wales, they are sitting with soil temperatures averaging around 6.5 degrees.
Okay. So again, sort of almost like on the verge of growth, but ready for some milder waves to come in.
Yeah, that's right. And if we go down to Reading, they are sitting at about 7.5 degrees.
Yeah, which is the same again, but maybe even more ready.
You could say Reading is readier.
Yeah.
Good. Lahinch in Ireland, they're sitting at about 7 degrees.
Right, okay, so Lahinch is on the brink then. And so same again. And so if these averages tell us anything, and remember, we are making interpretations of past averages and sort of not dealing with the present reality, then we might be sitting close to that soil temperature level when growth begins, but we would still need consistent waves of sort of milder temperatures coming in, coupled with decent light levels, etc., for long enough to get things moving in a meaningful way. But I think these averages do show just how close we are to the early signs of spring growth, especially further south and west. We just need those milder waves to start rolling in.
Yeah, and I think a good rule of thumb is to look at the temperature, the daytime temperatures we're getting, and assume that in the top few centimetres, we're going to be mirroring those temperatures fairly closely.
Yeah. Good, but we certainly don't need the dreaded easterlies coming over just yet, do we? Or at all, obviously.
No, we don't want those.
No, we don't. Okay, so to summarise, the month of March will see increasing light levels and increasing evapotranspiration rates, which may even exceed rainfall in those drier areas, but maybe not for the wetter areas. But overall, we think that March is likely or can be a drying month, and daytime temperatures should be moving upward, but those overnight temperatures will likely stay low and sort of hold things back by influencing the soil temperatures. And unless we get some mild conditions coming over, which they can, but so can the colder easterlies, and we might see some growth. But from a microdocium patch point of view, we should be moving into more positive territory with lower leaf wetness hours and those lower temperatures reducing the risk of attack. So maybe the pressure's reducing in that regard. So although it's not a time of really strong growth, we shouldn't get too much microdocium patch disease damage either. And hopefully we'll see some positive waves of growth. And you know, all we need to do is be ready and prepared for them when they come. But all in all, March sounds to me, Glenn, like it could be a positive month, especially if we don't require significant amounts of growth to get us out of trouble. But if that is the case, then you're going to need to get lucky.
Yes. Hopefully things are looking up, but let's not forget that March can still stay really cold. And occasionally it can be a wet month, so we've still got to keep looking onto that weather horizon.
Well, Glenn, we've just discussed that the evapotranspiration rates will be on the increase and that rainfall is potentially decreasing. So there is the potential, hopefully, for some good, dry golfing conditions in March. Fingers crossed. And with low levels of growth, not placing too many demands on the green staff. So how does all this impact on the golfer satisfaction levels?
Well, March can provide some pretty amazing golf courses to play, can't it? We start to see a little more daylight. We see some stunning low suns to highlight those ground contours that the high sun fails to emphasise. And as you say, we can get some pretty low growth levels from our turf. And that just offers enough turf stimulation to begin getting some definition. You know, we've got little to no rough anywhere. We've got some firm and smooth, tight playing surfaces. And if we've taken good grass coverage through the winter and stayed disease-free, or as we spoke about in previous podcasts, you've won that first and second and still winning the third microdocium battle, then March can produce some pretty amazing golfing conditions. We do, of course, move next month into the dreaded intermittent and differential growth that the increasing temperatures that we see moving in can start to cause with those different grass species. And then we begin moving into POA seed head management. So March is pretty good. It's certainly not perfect, but it's better than what's coming down the line.
Yeah, and as you said, that's assuming that we've got here clean and that we're in the agronomic winners dimension that we visited in January. But what about if we're in the agronomic losers dimension with scarred putting surfaces and unhappy golfers?
Well, then March is a very difficult month, isn't it? What we're looking for to get out of those situations is growth conditions to aid and begin and kickstart our recovery. And March tends to present very difficult growing conditions. It's really the month that all the autumn and Christmas investments pay off in. If we got all of those things right, then in March we can get some pretty happy customers.
Yeah, but we might still have some frost closures in there restricting golf, which is still a challenge at this time.
Yes, we can still see frosts in March, and we're now entering into a time when we need to preserve the putting surface the best we can going into the season. Frost policies are all about understanding your club structure, knowing who the key decision makers are, and the individual golf course challenges. Yeah. But just remember, the temperature will pick up soon, surfaces may become more challenging to manage, and they will require more maintenance inputs. So whilst now is tricky, it has the potential to get worse until around the first week of June. That's the kind of time I'm confident that we can rely on the weather to unlock growth and recover the winter's challenges. That growth may well come earlier, but if you assume the first week of June, then you're not going to be disappointed.
Oh, blimey, that is a long way away, isn't it?
Still is, yeah.
But, okay, fair enough. That's the reality check that we might need. And, of course, during March, wet conditions are still possible, aren't they? And they can cause real difficulties at this time when we're trying to prevent the course from, churning up at this quite late stage of things.
Yes, evapotranspiration rates, they are on the increase, but in a wet, cold March, that can make the whole process a lot tougher.
Well, let's just keep working hard so that we can come through the last of the winter in good condition and hopefully get a decent break of weather to give us that nice, firm and running early spring golf course for everyone to enjoy. This will hopefully get some golfers on board before the challenging months of April and May come to hit us hard, potentially. But it's not just about the greens at this time, is it? What about the wider course? What do you think we should be thinking about in terms of the fairways, tees and roughs, Glenn?
Well, of course, we now need to be thinking about transitioning back into a full-on golf course rather than the traffic management exercise we've been experiencing for the last 4 months. So it's removal and bringing in those ropes, and how we do that, we've got to kind of combine that with mowing, protecting wet areas still. That's going to be on a lot of people's minds, just transitioning in. We should also be thinking about those worn areas that didn't cope so well with the winter traffic and how we can recover those. Thinking about some aeration in those when the soil conditions are right. That's going to go a long way to helping. Keeping an eye on those soil temperatures to maybe do some overseeding where needed. And if we do some of that overseeding, Henry, what fertiliser advice can you give to help recover those worn and beaten areas of the course?
That's a good question. We tend to, at this time, look at the application of controlled release fertilisers at this time, where the granules are designed to only release their nutrient when conditions are suitable for growth. And at this time, that would be when some waves of growth come in. So we're generally talking about the application of Sierra Blend or Sierra Blend Plus ranges at this time, with the Sierra Blend range being the larger granule, 2 to 4 mil, while the Sierra Blend Plus is a smaller grade, 1 to 2.5 mil, and you would choose either appropriate to the type of turf that you're using and the mowing height. For fairways approaches, collars and surrounds, you might be thinking of the Sierra Blend Plus, a smaller granule, possibly one of our spring starters, which is available in either a 3-month plus grade, the 24-5-13, or the 5-month plus grade, the 24-5-8, while for coarser turf mown around and above 25 millimetres, that might be traffic routes or sort of green surrounds or whatever, you might be considering the Sierra Blend grades. But with both fertilisers, what we're talking about here is a measured release over that stated release period, rather than applying a fertiliser to create a sort of an unwanted surge of unmanageable growth when temperatures kick in. The CRFs are a great choice at this time of year because they only release when conditions are suitable for growth. And as a result, they're really efficient in terms of their sort of nutrient use efficiency. And as you mentioned, overseeding might start entering people's minds at this time. And if that is the case, then we also have specialist grades with analyses, higher phosphorus really, that are able to support the establishment of new seedlings as well. And for that, you would take a look at the renovator grades from both ranges.
All good advice. But do we need to be thinking about that kind of thing with teas as well, Henry? A lot of those par-free teas will be pretty beaten up now, and recovery is going to be really critical to starting the season on the right foot. Any advice with those heavily worn and trafficked teas?
Yeah, we are thinking in this way, aren't we, at this time? We're now starting to sort of, think ahead and moving things on, aren't we? Well, your choice of fertiliser, again, would depend on the likelihood of growth and also the type and duration of the response that you need. Being realistic, of course, to conditions, but also looking onto that horizon. So you can place a controlled release fertiliser in readiness for the emergence of growing conditions, or you might think about applying a conventional type fertiliser, something like the Green Master Cold Start formulation, for a more immediate boost if growing conditions begin to present themselves as a more immediate opportunity that you could take advantage of. But when choosing, you would also need to take into account your other maintenance requirements like seeding, or whether you're going to scarify or aerate, etc. when thinking about the type of fertilizer that you're using or when to schedule them. You don't want to be deeply scarifying teas, for instance, immediately after applying a 3 or 5 month controlled release fertilizer, because you might damage the coating and undo all the good that brings. So there's plenty to consider and a lot of options available, actually, depending on the type of response that you're aiming to achieve. So rather than going on too much, I would say to have a word with our team if you need to discuss your plan, and they'll try to suggest the best technology that suits your own needs.
But do you think we should be thinking about variable strategies on teas, Henry? Things like small par threes that need a lot of recovery due to excessive divoting, compared to that back tea, that back blue tea that gets very little pay and gets very, very fatchy. Any suggestions on which you go about varying the management on those?
Yeah. Well, I think, different approaches would be best employed to sort of cater for those different agronomic requirements. Those heavily worn areas would probably need a heftier response, and overseeding would probably be in the game as well. So they might warrant a balanced NPK analysis with maybe a blend of conventional and CRF release technologies, whereas those kind of less worn areas might merit a lower rate application of what you might call a quieter formulation that might contain a greater slow release or controlled release component, where you're just wanting to, pick things up rather than create a more substantial response. So it might be the difference between either a ProTurf for those heavily worn areas where an instant growth response is possible, versus a sort of Sierra Blend Plus, which contains a greater level of coated nutrient for those areas that just need a sort of quieter boost, as conditions allow. As always, you just need to choose the right technology or blend for the desired responses for each individual situation. We've got plenty of ranges with plenty of different release technologies and analyses to choose from. And so we will have exactly what you need somewhere. We probably just need to take a little time to talk you through the differences in order to make the right choice.
Useful thoughts. Okay, so when we move out into our fairways, though, we've got some real challenges there, haven't we?
Why? What do you mean?
Well, I think the easiest way to explain this one is my favourite March anecdote.
Excellent. Well, Glenn, you know that I enjoy your pain of greenkeeping stories.
Oh, wow, Henry. This one all starts in a committee meeting in the meeting room at a golf club I managed around mid-March. Apparently, there had been uproar.
Well, I presume that means that one person had made a comment at the bar under their breath after a bad round and a couple of pints, and then all hell broke loose.
Maybe, I'll never know, but apparently we were no longer looking after or divoting the fairways. We had been spending our time doing lots of unnecessary things, such as tree removal and tee construction, and therefore had neglected our duties to divot fairways.
Oh dear, Glenn. It sounds like a dereliction of duty to me.
Well, we talked it through at committee level. We talked through the winter challenges of getting seed to establish, the labour shortage we were dealing with at the time, long-term investments we were making in projects that the club needed to make to move forward, the value of doing those projects in-house and the cost savings of doing that in-house. We'd all noted the amount of additional play we were getting and sustaining during the winter. We noted the lack of desire to use AstroTurf mats on the fairways, and by the end of the conversation, the whole committee was applauding themselves and patting themselves on the back, and we all agreed that the problem was we were just too good a committee at looking forward into the future and investing our time and finances appropriately. We just made the course so damn popular that everyone wanted to play all the time. Well done, us.
Yes, indeed.
I did actually get accused in a rather aggressive way once that I'd made the golf course too good.
Yeah, I've had that before when I was looking after the bowling green. People started bitterly complaining that the green was too good. And it just brought home the point that there is absolutely no point in trying to please everyone, because some people are only happy when they're moaning.
Yeah, I know. This member was an absolute classic, because he came up to me in a rather aggressive manner one day and told me he used to be able to play the golf course whenever he wanted with no one around him to annoy him. But now the course is good, there's no point because I don't enjoy it. There's just too many people here. What's the point of a good conditioned golf course if you can't enjoy it when you want? Me arriving and improving the quality was the worst thing that ever happened to the club. He was really shouting at me when he was saying this as well. It was not funny at the time, but
no, I mean, it is a great sort of backhanded compliment, isn't it? You should have seen through it and been chuffed by that.
Yeah, I wish I had. Anyway, back to the story. At the end of the committee meeting, we all agreed that we would summon up the great and the good from the club and arrange a divot afternoon. I asked if we could delay it because the soil temperatures were a bit chilly and I wasn't sure how much seed establishment we were going to get. But we were overruled. After all, we had some momentum now. And true to the committee's word, we got a decent divot party together and divoted the whole course. As always, great momentum was started on the first with around 20 of us. And that had depleted to a bit of a slog on the back nine with just the remaining hardcore members left. But we did it. Everyone was very happy. We had a couple of beers in the bar and told ourselves what a good job we'd done. We'd solved all the problems and we were all happy. But of course, it was March. The cold winds came, the seed dried out, the pheasants had a feast and the remaining seed blew away. Nothing germinated as it was just too cold. And then next week I was accused of not divoting the fairways by one of the divot crew that had helped me out the previous week. And that, Henry, is one of the reasons we didn't divot in March, why fairways were weaker than we wanted to, and I never managed to get another divot party off the ground. Because in March they just don't work.
Yes, a cautionary tale, that one, Glenn. and I hear you. And just remember, Glenn, that one day you'll be free from all this pent-up angst. But until then, we'll gladly use it for podcast content.
Thanks, Henry. I always feel a little bit better afterwards.
Well, we do too, Glenn, but probably not in the same way.
So, Henry, what are the agronomic risks that we need to be aware of in March?
Well, Glenn, I think that our agronomic approach to March for the greens will depend on how well they came through the autumn and early winter, and in particular, how well the microdochium patch disease control strategy went. You know, those battles 1 and 2 that we've been discussing. But your approach might also have to factor in what you've planned in terms of early season renovation work as well. So if you've come through battles 1 and 2, you know, the autumn and early winter, in good shape and don't have too much early preparation work to be getting on with, then March might be a time to enjoy that period of semi-dormancy before that differential growth kicks off and the poa annua seeding starts, as you mentioned earlier. But you've said before, Glenn, that this actually can be a really good time for producing fast and smooth putting surfaces without actually having to do too much.
That's right. A dry, cold March can be a great time if you're going to be able to coast along and enjoy those autumn and winter investments.
Yeah, and you would just have to gauge the level of disease pressure or risk and also decide on the needs to initiate growth. But overall, if you're in good shape coming into March, then this should be a fairly straightforward month agronomically.
Yeah, I suppose the only thing to be mindful of is complacency and not overlooking any opportunities for positive action.
Yeah.
And then to find that as you move on into April, conditions take a step backwards. But,
yes.
And if you're not in as good a shape going into May as you want it to be.
Yes, that is right. And so on balance, I think that we need to take those chances to boost growth at this time because they're so important, and they might dry up in April and May. You just never know, do you? But I suppose that might be my cautious agronomist's attitude coming to the fore there.
Yes, indeed. Experience of your sites can count for a lot at this time of year.
Yeah, it can. It certainly should be factored into things. So alternatively, if you've come through battles 1 and 2 unscathed, but you do have some early renovations to get through, then you would definitely be looking to jump on those opportunities to amplify your sort of growth opportunities with the application of nutrition. You know, we're trying to set up and then ride on the back of, you know, amplified growth waves, aren't we, when they come along? So some fertilizer might help. And at this time, nutritionally, we're mainly looking to use ammonium sulfate-based seeds as long as our soil temperatures are running at 7 to 8 degrees centigrade and above. The amount of nitrogen that you apply will depend on the magnitude of the opportunity and the response that you require. Traditionally, a Green Master Pro Light Invigorator type product, 408 plus iron, or more recently an Invigorator Plus, which is a 4014 plus iron granular, would have been used to tickle things along, you know, supplying 2 to 3 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per week over a 4 to 5 week period, just to move things forward. But in recent years, we've seen the use of higher nitrogen fertilizers like the Green Master Pro Light Cold Start, which is an 1155 plus iron, and that has become well established as a more proactive alternative.
Why do you think that is, Henry?
It's just a product that performs, Glenn, isn't it? It just really does a job at this time of year, given reasonable conditions, i.e., you know, some waves of growth. It will kick in really quickly and provide an immediate and meaningful growth response to allow quick recovery through heavy top dressings in particular. Obviously, the response would be dependent on growing conditions at the time, but it really is a great formulation that allows you to get set for and amplify any subsequent growth waves that might be coming through during the following 5 to 6 weeks. And this is a massive advantage when it comes to getting preparation work done and the greens ready, well, as ready as they can be before the Masters.
Yeah, Cold Start's been a bit of a game changer for some golf courses, hasn't it? I never used to use it, but I can see I can see it's established itself as a fixture at this end of the year.
Yeah, it really has. It's cold start time. But it seemed to just come along at the right time, actually, if I'm being honest, to become a part of that sort of super early season preparation movement that developed amongst greenkeepers 8 to 10 years ago. And as a company, we've always been really careful to make sure that it was only being recommended and used to support, specific agronomic situations or scenarios, and that it shouldn't lead to an escalation of annual nitrogen use, for instance. For me, it should be considered as a part of an overall rephasing of your nitrogen inputs for the year, the kind of thing that I spoke about last month.
Okay, then, so whilst we're on nitrogen inputs, what are we talking about at this time of the year?
Yeah, well, cold start applied at 25 grams per metre squared would supply in the region of 28 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare over a 6 to 8 week period. So that would equate to an average of 4 to 5 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per week, which is quite a lot. But appropriate for the right conditions and appropriate to support, a specific agronomic function, i.e. the amplification of available growth waves to get the greens moving and recovered through the early season top dressings in particular. It is a specific agronomic tool rather than being appropriate for every situation.
Yeah, I can see that. And I definitely think of loads of situations and areas of the course I'd be leaning on that technology in certain different years, depending on what was going on.
Yes.
So what about those greens that have really struggled through the autumn and winter then?
Yes. Yeah, lastly. And we visited them in the January episode, didn't we? The sort of agronomic losers zone with heavily scarred greens. And they're going to need all the help that they can get, aren't they, at this time, as we mentioned previously. But we can generate recovery at this time with the right fertilizers, given the right conditions. And again, we would lean to sulfate of ammonia-based feeds like the invigorators or the cold start, as long as those waves of growth are coming through and available to be amplified. But we should always say that filling in from scarring or the recovery of a weakened plant in poor growing conditions can be a very slow process, especially if conditions are against you. And so we may need to use all our greenkeeping wiles to get us through this period.
Yes, and we'll certainly need to set a realistic level of expectation for all that are concerned.
Yes, we do. But I think, knowing the pressures of that expectation, that this kind of situation will require a proactive approach.
And I suppose that some greenkeepers would be worried that such an early application of nitrogen might make things worse.
Well, the wrong fertiliser possibly, but a well-balanced formulation containing the right levels of ammonium sulfate and iron sulfate won't encourage the development of disease, if that's what you mean. In our trials, we always see that they actually slow it down. Our work through this period shows that the development of microdochium patch disease is always greater on those unfertilized areas or the weakened turf. The trials always show at this time that doing nothing can be the very worst thing that you can do, because at best you get no recovery from the scarring, and at worst, on those unfertilized areas, any active disease can continue to spiral out of control to make matters significantly worse.
And so nutrition is becoming agronomically very important during the month of March.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And sort of across the course, potentially. It's certainly in the game for a number of scenarios, and this is what we need to think about. It won't be appropriate for all situations, but you just need to be reading how the sort of the weather's going, and also taking a look at sort of what you need, what kind of turf responses that you need, and select the right material for the job.
And of course, nutrition is still one of the foundation stones of our integrated disease control strategies. It never fails to amaze me looking at trials just how much impact we get to improve and slow down disease development when we get those nutrition levels right.
Yeah, our slow it down strategies of nutrition plus moisture management and the use of iron should still be being deployed at this time when appropriate. And hopefully, with that reduced level of disease pressure, they might be sufficient to fully guide us through to spring, given reasonable conditions.
Indeed. Generally, it is a dry and cold time, so not necessarily that conducive to the rapid development of microdocium to patch.
Yeah, but we may have that situation of dormant scars and disease lurking in the background, ready to animate, mightn't we?
Indeed. And so, depending on the situation and the forecasted conditions, we might need to bring in some fungicide technology to try and zero that population out.
Yes. And so what is our strategy in this regard, and what fungicides might we be using?
Well, we'll need to be keeping a very close eye on that weather horizon and on the lookout for milder and damper conditions that might encourage a resurgence or even a new outbreak of microdocium patch disease.
Yeah, it can still happen, can't it? And even a covering of snow on unfrozen ground might cause us problems.
Yeah, they're all scenarios that are entirely possible in March, although starting to become less likely. We are nowhere near out of the woods yet, and winter can really bite back hard at this time.
Okay, so what fungicides are we thinking of using?
Well, it depends on those conditions. If winter does bite back, then we might well be more in medallion territory with its fludioxonil outside the plant's activity, mopping up any of those spores and the external pathogenic developments. But as always, to get the best results, we need to use it preventatively. So it would be deployed with the prospect of heightening disease pressure with the realistic chance of a damaging flare-up. It does have some curative activity, but it is much better when we use it ahead of the problem.
Yes. Understood, Glenn.
And in the event of active growth, which is also a possibility in March, if those waves fall positively for us, we might be better off using Instrata Elite, which also contains difenoconazole, which is an active inside the plant as well. Again, this is best applied preventatively, and so close reading of the situation on the ground and on the weather horizon is needed to make the right choice. And of course, don't forget to tank mix in your rider for extra turf quality and improved visual uplift without having to add too much nutrition or iron into that mix.
Yeah. The rider can really add terrific value at this time of year, can't it? But hopefully, Glenn, we will be riding out March and not needs to reach for the fungicides. Quickly moving on. But look, this time I think it's really important not to be in agronomic denial about the situation, because if fungicides are needed, they've got to be used. Even if you haven't planned for them, and if they are going to be used, they should be timed properly to get the best results.
Absolutely, Henry. We might not have planned for their use at this time, but we still need to be making good decisions and use them if needed. Look, growth is just around the corner. We're generally cooler and drier, so longevity of an application or the windows that we will need to apply them at are wider. Fungicide strategies in March are generally for those that don't get control when they wanted to last autumn. But let's not forget, a backward step at this time would be a disaster, and the weather conditions in the UK are more than capable of delivering something that is not normal.
I think that's right. I think we just need to, just make sure we're always doing the right thing, because we're looking to make progress, aren't we, at this time? And we definitely don't need any backward steps. And so in that regard, we also need to be mindful of other dangers, such as moss invasion at this time, especially into any thin or weakened areas that might also be lying damp or in shade. Our nutrient and iron input should help keep the moss in check. But if we aren't already making those treatments, then we would certainly need to be keeping an eye out for some possible sneaky moss ingress during March.
Yes, but it is more likely to be a break-even month in terms of moisture content for many areas, or even the start of a dry period. And so
yes,
it would only be jumping in quickly in exceptional circumstances.
Yes, and moss is one of those agronomic indicators, isn't it, that maybe highlights the need for a slight tweak in your program or a greater level of involvement. It can be a case of neglect. And also, on the other side of the coin, we have had a few really dry springs, haven't we, in recent years, and they can build and lead us into trouble if we haven't prepared for them properly. And so for many golf courses, March is the time when they start thinking about soil moisture management strategies too, with the application of those surfactants. And I will talk about this a bit later on, but essentially we use them to take better control of the soil moisture content. Well-chosen surfactants are used at this time to help slow down that drying process, but they also enable more effective re-wetting of the soil as well, and to make things a lot easier to manage. But more on that in a little while.
Yes, we need to be in front of the game with our surfactants, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say on that one a little later on.
Moisture management strategies are fundamentally important for all types of turf, and especially those areas sort of on drier sites, in drier areas. And good stress management is becoming even more critical, isn't it, with the development of summer dollar spot becoming more and more of an issue in the UK and Ireland. And I think we'll delve a little deeper into that subject next month, because our ITM strategy against dollar spot in those susceptible areas needs to start factoring in preventative moisture management and nutrient programs to reduce the risk of attack later on, especially for those wider course areas where the use of fungicides it would not be viable or desirable during the summer.
Yes, dollar spot can begin its march in March. Not the pathogen, but the plant's health. And March gives us a chance to build a strong plant. Missed opportunities here put us on the back foot, especially for those sites that routinely experience summer stressful conditions and extremes. It can come really quick and be extremely damaging.
Yeah, it can, can't it? So let's get in front of dollar spot this year and start our forward thinking next month, because there's a lot that we can do, as you found out in last year's International Turfgrass Research Conference, isn't there? So look, let's get on that one nice and early this year.
Good idea, because in situations of low to moderate pressure, then our cultural non-fungicidal management strategies can make a real difference.
Indeed they can. And closer to home, there's a lot to do in March, isn't there? But closer to home in March, we might see the onset of some leatherjacket grub activity or damage from secondary pests, which can be extremely problematic at this time too.
Yes, so I'm going to focus on our monitoring and management strategies that we might employ at this time of the year to try and minimise the potential levels of damage.
Yeah, and you've got some good news on acelepryn as well, don't you?
We do have some good news, so let's take a little look at that one later on too.
Very good. And so it is clear that although March can be a testing time, we think that it also might be a time of opportunity to get things moving and lay a good foundation for the year ahead, and also get our preventative programs in place. And so, as always, Glenn, there is plenty to talk about in part 2.
Yes, and I'm going to do a bit more detail on leather jackets and explain the latest news. And you're going to get us all thinking about our moisture management strategies.
Yes, I am, Glenn. And of course, let's not forget your application tip of the month.
Yes, but before all that, let's get the kettle on, have a catch up and a cuppa.
Good idea, and I'm on my way, Glenn.
welcome back to part 2 of March's edition of On the Horizon.
Thanks, Glenn.
And in part 2, we'll be talking about leather jacket activity and also for starters, summer moisture management and stress mitigation strategies.
Yes, and not forgetting your application tip of the month, which I believe is establishing itself something of a cult following, Glenn.
Is it, Henry?
No. Is it short this month, Glenn?
It's a moderate one, Henry. It's
right.
Important, but not too heavy.
Oh, well, that is good news. And one for the diehards again, who make it right to the end. But first, a cuppa, Glenn.
Indeed. And Ed tells me your move over to loose leaf tea has led to a real explosion of possibilities for your office blends.
Yes, it has. And we are currently running with over 20 different types of tea on my windowsill at the Ilkley office, and I've had to buy loads and loads of new tea caddies, but it's all needed for our blending purposes. And so, yes, in all honesty, we have completely spiraled hopelessly out of control. But we are busy finalising a few new recipes for standalone blends to go alongside those classic mind benders and shong benders.
Anything you can tell us?
Well, the smoky sunset is coming along and the electric storm is also taking shape nicely.
Oh dear. You picked up a couple of new varieties, a few new varieties over in Galway, didn't you?
Yes, I did, at Camilla's Tea Emporium in Galway, and also actually at Harrogate too, thanks to the True Tea Company, which I stumbled across on my Thursday wander around town. And they actually said they were lovely in there. And they said that they'd had quite a few in from the Greenkeepers Conference. So, I'm not the only one. But I think the main development with our move to loose leaf tea is that it now means that me and Ed can read each other's tea leaves.
Ooh, so how's that going?
Really, really good. And for Ed, I think I'm really good at this. For Ed, I mainly see good health and great wisdom for the future.
Feels appropriate and nice. Good for him. What about yours? What did Ed see for you?
Well, yes. Well, Ed says that all he can see is Waldorf and Statler. You know, the two old blokes from the Muppets?
Yeah, I know who they are, and that's a bit strange. What do you think he means?
No idea.
Well, anyway, there weren't any problems with the tea leaves at the BTME show at Harrogate, were there? Your tea bags were something of a minor hit, Henry.
A minor hit, they were. Thank you, Glenn.
And I think the mind benders and the shong bonders, I think the mind benders and the shong benders were generally greatly appreciated by some of our more adventurous listeners.
Yes, I made up 100 bags of each.
Wow.
And suffice it to say that we will be working through the remainder for a few weeks yet.
I enjoyed the mind bender, and I think the general consensus from my little bit of polling was fairly positive for that.
Yes.
Not so sure that the world is ready for shong benders just yet, though.
Well, it is an acquired taste, but once you get used to it, Glenn, I can assure you that you never go back. Liam Rowlands became a fan, and I should, at this moment, say a big congratulations to Liam, as well as Fergal, Martin and Rob Ainscoe, because they all passed their facts exam on the run up to the show.
Well done,
which is
boys.
great. So that, yes, and so they are now FQA, which is Facts Qualified Fertiliser Advisors. And also thanks to Christian at the STRI for tutoring them so well.
Excellent. Good job, Christian. Very good. So Talk me through how the conference season has been for you, Henry.
Wow, it's been really good, Glenn. And as we mentioned, it all started at the ATPI conference in Galway, which was a real treat and a great start to the year. Thank you, Damien and Owen. And you'll never guess who I bumped into there, Glenn, which came as a complete surprise.
I think I might know this one, Henry.
Yes, Glenn, you were there, weren't you? And I don't know what happened there. Clearly, you have no idea what you're doing.
I completely forgot I was even going.
Yes, you did. But we had a lovely time, didn't we?
Yes, we did. And Coleman and Fergal looked after us very well too. Thank you, Coleman and Fergal. Appreciated that. And I enjoyed catching up with everyone and listening to some very interesting presentations.
Well, thank you, Glenn.
Yes, and I was there for yours as well.
Oh.
Which, in fairness, was surprisingly entertaining considering what the subject matter was. The new EU fertiliser regulations. I think you pulled every trick in the bag out to get yourself through that one.
Yes. Well, I knew I was in trouble when people were coming up to me beforehand, offering their apologies for absence based on the subject matter. But I faced up and I battled on with what I actually consider to be an extremely interesting and important subject, Glenn.
Yeah, I spent the time catching up on my emails during that one, Henry. But of course, there was no Galway hangover to contend with this year, was there?
No.
We might have to start calling you Cinderella the way you disappear after dinner.
Yeah, we did have a lovely couple of meals, but I was early to bed both nights, unlike some people. Overall, I think it was really positive and an enjoyable conference, and that I think we all left looking forward to the year ahead. And then, well, you were looking forward to Spain, weren't you? Because you went over there with Andy to join the Norwegian Greenkeepers Conference in Malaga.
I did, and I got fully embroiled in a discussion with Dr. Andy Owen and Dr. Christian Spring about what the industry does when the sand dries up and top dressing as we know it disappears.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Those two are always good value. And it sounds like that issue might be on the horizon for us then.
Yeah, it's on the way and something that we need to prepare and think about. And that's what happens when you stay up after 10 o'clock, Henry.
Yeah, is it? And but certainly content for a future edition, Glenn.
Yes, indeed. And then, of course, we went up to Harrogate for the BTME show, which was brilliant as usual.
Yeah,
both in Syngenta and ICL had some fairly big announcements to make, didn't we?
We did.
For us, it was the full approval of Acelepryn in the UK, having achieved that previously in Ireland. The final details are being thrashed out, and we'll be excited to let you know exactly when we have them all finished. And for you, it was your new Eco-S biodegradable controlled release fertiliser, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
And of course, we were very, very pleased to be introducing everyone to our new UK business manager, Sarah Hughes.
Yeah, it's great to meet Sarah. You know, our stand was all about the Eco-S, wasn't it? The sort of biodegradable coating for CRF, which is a massive breakthrough from ICL. Well, and of course, everyone, if we're thinking about, you know, our impact on the environment. And hopefully, well, definitely, it'll help safeguard the use of controlled release fertilizers going forward, which is really important because, as I've already mentioned, there's such an efficient way of delivering nutrition. So yes, there was plenty of good news to talk about. What was your highlight of BTME, Glenn? Was it the Syngenta 5K run?
Well, that wasn't pretty on a personal level, but we did raise a decent amount of money for the Greenkeeper Benevolent Fund.
Ah, well done.
And we had plenty of kind words about this podcast and a few more listener approaching on the horizon.
Yes.
Yes.
It was really good. I mean, it wasn't, you know, like a chorus every 2 minutes, but it was...
They were quite shy listener approachings as well, weren't they?
Yeah,
they kind of sneak up
we
and go,
got some.
listener approaching? on the horizon.
Yeah.
We need some shouts next year, boys and girls.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, I was hoping for a call response that someone would shout out, listener approaching, and then at the top of my voice, I would shout out on the horizon, or everyone on the stand would. And it would be a bit like, a Bavarian drinking hall. But no, it wasn't like that at all. No. Anyway, so look, shall we do a few shout outs for people who did that?
Okay, good idea. And so in no particular order, some big shout outs to
Ashley did it. Sandy did it. I think Gordon H did it.
Excellent.
We've got to mention Chris T as well. There were loads, actually. I can't remember anyone else.
Very good. Well, I had Malk M. And of course,
yes,
thrilled to meet him.
Yes.
Des the lecturer.
Des the lecturer was excellent. He made my whole show.
He's a star. I love him because he forces his students to listen to this podcast. So 50% of our listening numbers are beaten into it by Des the lecturer.
Des, otherwise they fail.
If you're listening to this, lads, we're sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. So anyway, we hope to sort of see you at some point.
Some deals to be done with Des. Of course, Keith at Darwin. It was good to see him, and he was a finalist for the Amenity Spray Operator of the Year award. Thanks for listening to the podcast, Keith. Great to have dinner with you. He and Darren, who won it, Darren from Turnberry. Congratulations to you, Darren. What was really, really pleasing, Henry, is they both entered because they'd heard us talking about it on the podcast.
They did, which is brilliant.
And we had a golf course winner, which is what we wanted. Yes. I told you the application tip of the month was a good idea.
Yes, well, I think it is too, Glenn. I'm only being sarky when I slag it off. But it just shows, Glenn, doesn't it, that dreams can come true.
They can.
And it was, it was great to catch up with Keith and his Greens chairman, who are both solid gold. And so that was brilliant. And then if that wasn't enough, you went over to GIS, didn't you, in Orlando?
Yes. I've become pretty busy in my new international role, and I will report back on the golf industry show next month because a lot of our new developments originate from the States. And so I thought if I could spot anything over there that might appear on our horizon in the near future.
Yeah, that would be really good, Glenn, because when you came back from that sort of research show, it came out with loads of stuff that was really interesting. So I'm looking forward to that. Good.
And it was good to see the UK and Ireland so well represented over there at uni.
Yes.
As usual. It really is a great experience. Anything else you've been up to that springs to mind, Henry?
Well, looking into the tea leaves, Glenn, I can see moisture management, leather jackets, and an application tip of the month on the horizon.
Sounds good to me. Okay, Henry, you're going to talk to us about the use of specialist turf surfactants, or wetting agents as we've been traditionally calling them, and soil moisture management at this time of year, because March potentially is the beginning of a drying period for some of the drier areas in the country, if recent years are anything to go by.
Yes.
It's time to get our plans in place, isn't it?
Yes, because soil moisture management is another one of our key agronomic parameters that we need to be able to set at the right level. It's kind of like similar to nutrition, really, that too much soil moisture is bad as is too little. And so in order to maintain plant health, maintain consistent playing qualities, possibly drive a sward species composition change, or just to simply provide a good, stable agronomic foundation, we need to try to keep the soil moisture content in the right area for as long as possible through the year. Soil moisture management is absolutely critical agronomically.
Okay, so if we're working towards specific targets, we're going to need a moisture probe to help us accurately measure what is going on.
Yes, absolutely.
So we need our moisture probes. We need to know how to make sure they're set up correctly.
Yes.
And we need to actually take them off the shelf and use them.
Yes, we do. And that is just around the corner, isn't it? If not now. And so if we are using our moisture probes, we need to be systematic about it, taking grid patterns, to give us good averages, but also to allow us to see the level of variability, between the readings in each individual area. And we also need to be systematic about collecting and collating the data if possible. And I think you might have done something on that in your blog, haven't you, Glenn?
Yeah, check out the Greencast Advisory Turf blog for loads of useful information around that subject. Sean's been leading that one for a while now. He's doing a top job.
He certainly is. And, so what we're trying to do is keep our soil moisture content within defined target ranges where possible. But those target ranges will vary depending on the style of the course or the playing quality requirements. And this is because soil moisture content sort of pretty much governs the surface firmness level, to a large degree. But it will also influence the presence of different grass types over a longer term that you might be wanting to favour. But the good thing is that we can set defined targets for each style of course and their sort of surface firmness requirements, as well as their ideal soil species composition. And so for a fescue dominant links, we might be aiming for soil moisture contents between 15 and 20 volumetric moisture content, that's VMC, or lower, depending on experience, really. For bent fescue heathland settings, we might be pitching them at a slightly higher level, but within that links range. And for annual meadowgrass dominant parkland settings, we might, or might not, be wanting to migrate them towards brown top bent or creeping bent by, resetting the environment.
As we discussed in your disturbance theory section last August.
Yes, and one of the ways in which we might try to do this would be to keep the soil VMC, volumetric moisture content, between 20 and 25%, so slightly higher than the links in the heathland settings. But for as long as possible during the year to help maintain those playing qualities, but maybe drive a progression as well. But that's, just for the sake of example.
Which you will struggle to achieve if you're shaving them down all the time, won't you? Yes,
those levels are challenging. Let's not go down that particular rabbit hole at the moment. But of course, that's a really important point, that extreme mowing will probably require an agronomic compromise in other areas. And so you might not be able to achieve moisture content targets if you're forcing the height of cut down too low.
And of course, it's worth mentioning that everyone's targets are going to be slightly different. All soils are different, construction methods and shaping. So it's important to establish your own target numbers. But for those ones that Henry's run through are pretty good guides to help you establish your own.
Yeah, I don't think we should be veering too far off those guidelines, because if you have limiting factors, that are keeping you, too high, for instance, then you should be looking to change them if you're wanting to make an agronomic change.
Okay, so assuming a reasonable mowing regime and we have established our VMC targets, how do we go about achieving those soil moisture content targets?
Well, we start at the beginning, don't we? We install drainage, we manage soil organic matter content within measurable target ranges, we amend and maintain open structured and sand dominated upper soil profiles. And we do all this to prevent undue water holding during those wet periods, but also to make it an easier growing medium for, effective re-wetting, but with an element of retention during those periods of dry weather. Agronomically, we work hard throughout the year to try and make our soil profiles controllable, agronomically.
We do, and we use our moisture probes to monitor the situation and guide our irrigation practices.
We do, and, having done that over the years, we know from our monitoring that if we dry a soil much below 20% VMC without the use of surfactants, especially if the soil organic matter content is too high, but also when it isn't, then we can quickly lose control of the situation and we lose consistency and see localized areas drying out and trending towards becoming hydrophobic, which would, obviously adversely affect plant health and maybe cause a loss of grass cover and destroy surface consistency. and, destroy playing quality. So the jeopardy associated with poor soil moisture management is huge. We've all seen the development of dry patch, and it can happen really quickly, especially during hot and dry and windy weather, and the damage can be devastating and long lasting. And, all of a sudden you might not be in charge of, even the most basic surface preparation work. You might have to raise your height of cut, for instance, just to sort of, keep things alive.
That's right. Your year can turn pretty nasty pretty quickly if you fall into that trap this early.
And so we can see that we are in the grip of a really tricky situation, because our soil moisture targets are actually either on the edge or within that danger area, below 20% BMC, where things can go pear-shaped very quickly if we're not careful.
Which is exactly why we need our surfactants in place.
Yes, because we don't have a problem of the greens spiralling out of control if we are using good quality surfactants in a preventative way. They comfortably allow us to position our soil moisture contents within those agronomically advantageous target ranges, around slightly above or slightly below 20% VMC, without them being on the edge or in danger of quickly turning bad. The surfactants provide a really nice agronomic dampener on what would otherwise be a really difficult, if not impossible, situation.
An agronomic dampener, Henry. I like that one.
Thanks, Glenn.
I heard another good one last week, the reverse Viking effect. I'll squeeze that one in another day, not today.
Well, I don't even know what the Viking effect is, let alone the reverse Viking effect.
I know. It's a good one.
Okay. The surfactants, as we can see, if they've been formulated correctly, not only slow down the drying process, but they also help prevent the development of dry patch or hydrophobicity. And they also allow for more effective re-wetting. Essentially they make irrigation more effective, which reduces the need for it. But that's if the surfactants are any good, of course. But at ICL and Syngenta, we have some good ones, don't we?
We do, because all wetting agents are not the same. Very cheap and nasty basic formulations out there that will only provide a superficial level of support before things start to turn bad in hot and dry conditions. And then there are those high quality formulations. And to be fair, there are a few of them out there, and they have been properly designed to make for efficient water movement into and through the root zone, and they help with retention in there too. And they've got reasonable levels of longevity. We generally aim at a month. But we have to recognise the varying pressures that they face with heat and drought in the summer, and of course poor rainfall levels. We do have to think about this a little bit like our fungicides and get in preventatively.
Yes, we do. And we have both TriSmart and Quilibra in our camp, don't we, as premium formulations that have both been put to the test in numerous trials, but also tried and tested to the agronomic limits in recent years out in the fields. And they simply don't let you down. Like TriSmart, for instance, had an amazing year in 2022 and was on the receiving end of some really severe soil moisture management, which was on show for all to see. And I think it kind of redefined what was possible, with some good supporting nutrition and careful agronomic monitoring and handling also in place, of course. But we're constantly putting our surfactant formulations to the test and trying to innovate improvements, which is not an easy task. But ultimately, I think that we're both happy to currently have surfactant technology available that is as good as it gets. And in our research, we're seeing some really promising results with new formulations. And we also have some data that shows that the benefits of these formulations go way beyond either soil moisture or turf quality improvements. For instance, in a couple of recent trials, we've seen significantly improved microbial biomass at the end of the season in surfactant treated plots compared to untreated. But we need to take care with this data because that's probably related mainly just to the improved soil moisture content throughout the year compared to those parched controls. And also we're starting to see in field trials the evidence for improved nutrient use efficiency that we've seen previously in the labs. So of course, these trials just show the importance of good soil moisture management, but also good surfactant formulations.
Indeed, and I had a really nice conversation with Dr. Christian Spring out in Spain at the Norwegian Greenkeepers Conference a few weeks back now about how moisture levels in the soil are probably the biggest driver, and certainly the biggest driver he can see at the moment for microbial populations. And of course, we then just moved into how do we start favourably managing that to improve the microbial populations. And wetting agents could well be, and surfactants could well be, one of the biggest drivers for positive microbial populations. And it's not actually something we're in control of that often, are we? So how do we get back into control of our moisture levels when we're not irrigating through those winter months?
Well, we're back to organic matter management, aeration and drainage, etc., aren't we? All those fundamental agronomic tasks that creates that solid foundation.
Indeed, that's right. We want to balance out drier in the winter and better retention in the summer, don't we?
Yeah.
So we're back to Colibra for us at Syngenta, Henry. We're very much on the same journey as you. We keep looking for better formulations. We keep looking at improved versions. But the truth is, to date, we just can't beat it. But we'll keep on trying, but we've got a pretty solid product.
Yeah, we're the same, Glenn. It's not easy.
So we've got some pretty solid products there in our surfactant technology, Henry.
We all know how essential and beneficial the quality surfactant formulations actually are in reality. But, in order to optimise their performance, they do need to be used preventatively and be in place and working when the dry down begins, or the damage will be done. And so that's why we start thinking about the use of wetting agents at this time of year, because we know from our recent experience that dry downs can start this early and we need to get in front of them.
That's right. I'd rather go early with an extra application than be too late and be on the back foot. And if it's a budget thing, earlier and preventative application is probably going to be more effective. So you might want to think about dropping the last one out of your program and moving it into March. But at the very least, you'll need to dust off the moisture probes and start with your systematic monitoring just to see how things are progressing.
Yeah, with soil moisture content being such an important agronomic parameter, we want to start exerting control nice and early with some good bulletproof technology. Let's come back to soil moisture management through the spring and summer because it is so important that we need to get it right.
Very good, Henry. Thank you for that. And yes, prevention is the key.
Okay, Glenn, thinking about March still and what might be on the horizon, could this be the start of the leatherjacket season?
Yes, it is. And it can be a testing time for course managers. It's now, for the bulk of the country, that the damage can begin to kick in. And managing that damage caused by leatherjackets can become painfully difficult.
Okay, so just remind us all why March is such a challenge in this regard.
Well, as we've discussed, temperatures are not kicking in regularly yet, and we need consistent temperatures to ignite grass growth so that the turf can outgrow the level of damage caused by any residual leatherjackets left over from our autumn treatments.
And so are you expecting a tricking year this year, Glenn?
Well, we had what seemed to be a low autumn hatch back in 2022. Lots of people reported very low levels of activity during last September and October. And I suspect that's down to the dry summer we had last year.
Yes, okay. So how do you think that might have impacted on things?
Well, the dry summer of 22 would have probably reduced the survival rates of leatherjackets in unirrigated swards. It wouldn't have killed them all off, but it would have knocked the population back a significant amount. And for most courses in the UK, the vast majority of the course will be unirrigated, with greens and tees only making up a small percentage of the golf course. So survival rates in irrigated areas wouldn't have been affected, so greens would have experienced the same levels of activity, but with population levels reduced. I do wonder what we're going to see this year, and I do hope for everyone's sake that it's a reduced number on those playing surfaces.
Yeah, and of course, unexpectedly, we had a very cold start to December last year, didn't we? With fairly prolonged periods of frozen ground for most of the country. How do you think that will have impacted on things?
Of course, and that was really unusual. In fact, the first time since 2010. But then we went warm again afterwards, didn't we? I know cold temperatures don't wipe populations out, as we've experienced prolonged cold periods in North America, where we still have problems, and we see it over in Norway too, where they get really hard cold winters. But I can't help thinking that a good hard frost when leather jackets were so juvenile can only help us out. It may have only reduced population levels slightly, but it would certainly have stalled or halted their development through that period, meaning we should have less mature larvae to overwinter.
Okay, well, that sounds like it might, generally be good news. Possibly lower populations due to the 2022 summer drought and a cold December, either slightly reducing populations, which is a bit hopeful, I think, but also maybe stalling their development. And of course, let's not forget that the advice and timing strategies for acelerin use has moved on a lot in recent years, giving us better levels of control too.
Indeed, and I'm a little scared to say it, Henry, but everything is pointing towards a lower pressure this spring than we've recently experienced.
Well, I hear the hesitation in your voice there, Glenn, and I completely understand it, especially on something like this, because predictions usually lead to egg on your face, don't they? So what do you think the risks are there? Where and how could our hesitant optimism backfire?
Okay, so crane flies can still lay a lot of eggs. One can lay over 300. So we don't need many crane flies to cause us a problem. And if we're trying to predict high pressure springs, then there are 3 things that I can think of that come into play. The first one is we need to be thinking more about survival rates of the eggs rather than the amount of crane flies flying. Each one can lay a lot of eggs, 300 plus, so we only need a dozen or so crane flies to lay an awful lot of eggs. And if they all survive, then we could well be in trouble. But if they don't, then we're not too bad. So I think that cold December, that's what I'm relying on more than the reduced populations we saw in the autumn. Okay, the next thing that I think about is the recolonisation opportunities. And how was the winter for relocation? How mobile were the leather jackets? How warm was it? How wet was it? A drying wind will limit the amount of time that they can be on the surface and therefore move around. Even a super clean surface achieved in the autumn with our really good preventative strategies is vulnerable to encroaching larvae if we have a mild and damp winter and spring. And then the third thing we need to think about is, what is the spring growth like? If we get a favourable spring wave and we move into nice growth early in that kind of mid-March period, then we can easily outgrow the damage being done by low leather jacket populations. But if it's cold enough for growth to be non-existent, but warm enough for leather jackets to be active and feeding, then we can begin to see some real problems.
Yeah, and of course, even with really low grub populations, that can cause us problems too, can't it? With damage from birds or animals foraging in search of the grubs being disproportionately severe.
Yep, that's right. Foraging animals and birds pecking is probably the biggest problem now. If people get their acelerin timings right in most cases, then we have generally solved the turf health issues. And then we're trying to deal with the frustratingly low populations that can attract birds.
Okay, so we do need to be careful with our optimism. But by this point of the year, if we've been monitoring, then we should have a pretty clear picture of what's going on in the soil. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then you'll know that we've recommended regular small-scale sheeting to monitor populations and areas of infestation throughout the winter.
Indeed, if you haven't been sheeting in the milder periods of the year, then now is the time to start, particularly if you're seeing weak or unhealthy turf in a particular area. This is important as leather jackets get blamed for a lot of things in the spring when that's not necessarily the case. So get your sheets out and check to see what you've got.
Okay, so if we are doing that, what does a high population look like? What sort of number are we talking? And what should we be doing if we find high levels of infestations in our soils?
Well, to answer the first question, it's a bit of an equation, Henry. The stronger the turf, the healthier it is, the higher the number of leather jackets that turf can tolerate. For example, if you've got a really healthy green, but the back left is in the shade, you may be able to tolerate 30 leather jackets per square metre in the main part of the green, but that same number in the shaded area would amplify the weakness of the sward dramatically. So is that the shade that's the problem, or is it the leather jackets? And as with everything in turf, it's a combination of all the factors. So we need to be looking at long-term strategies such as getting more light in that situation. And we need to be looking at mid-term strategies like improving the leather jacket management programs. And we need to be looking at short-term strategies like improving plant health and nutrition, and some targeted sheeting in weak areas where we have high populations and low sward health.
Yeah, we talked about this before, aren't we? And, you are a fan, I think, of large-scale sheeting, aren't you, Glenn?
Yes, I am. I think it's a really valuable cultural practice in our arsenal as a curative measure. It's a lot of work and it requires a lot of cooperation and communication from the membership, but the results can be effective if we keep targeting key areas. The evidence it provides when you do that big reveal and pull the sheet off and look at what's underneath is worth its weight in gold when communicating the challenge to your membership as well.
Okay, so for a challenging situation through to spring, I suppose we're very much back onto our integrated strategies of thinking about nutrition if appropriate, when growth emerges, easing back of any sort of additional management of traffic pressures, and some preventative stress management.
And lastly, of course, we have some good news. Acelepryn has its UK registration and can now be used outside of an emergency authorisation.
Yeah, that is good news, Glenn, isn't it? And will hopefully save me a lot of paperwork as well.
I know you and Kev have done a formidable job over the last 4 years. I bet you'll be sad to see that job disappear from your to-do list.
No, not really, Glenn. So Acelepryn will be available in the spring, but you haven't mentioned it in any of the solutions that we've spoken about. Why not?
Well, Acelepryn is really only effective on those juvenile larvae, which are our target in the autumn. So using it now, whilst it would scratch an itch that many people have of needing to do something, just wouldn't be as effective as it would if we used it in the autumn. Now, if we had 2 applications on the label, which we don't, I'd probably say if you're in a tricky position in the spring, it's worth a try. But it's just not there. It's not on the label. We have 1 application. The regulatory bodies have restricted its use to 1 application.
Yeah, so although, it might be tempting to use it in spring, it's best to use Acelepryn at the right time, which is in the autumn.
That's absolutely right. But I understand there's going to be temptation there, and I wholeheartedly recommend that you don't use it on high pressure leather jackets in the spring, as it's not going to be particularly effective. And then you won't be able to use it in those areas in the autumn because you'll have used your 1 application a year, and that's going to lead to a bigger problem next year.
Okay, but I know you've been working on something else as well, Glenn.
We have. We've been doing a lot of work looking at entopathogenic nematodes in the last year and their use on golf greens in the UK. And we've got some good, strong recommendations for people.
Great. Anything that's of any use in March?
No, Henry, it's far too cold. In fact, unless we get around 6 hours of the day above 8 degrees, then I'd say don't bother with nematodes. You're wasting your money. And it's unlikely we're going to see those temperatures in March. And if we do, growth should be pretty strong. and recover the damage that we could see. So I'd leave it for now. So I'd stick to the large-scale sheeting for now. Watch this space for a whole load of interesting data to help get the industry get the best from these nematodes.
Okay, so looking forward to that, and thank you very much, Glenn. Okay, Glenn, so what's the application tip of the month?
Well, Henry, since we've been talking about wetting agents this month,
yes,
I thought I'd give people a quick outline on how to achieve higher water volumes and what the point of higher water volumes is.
Oh, very good. Now that does actually sound interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. When we apply things like wetting agents, we want to apply at higher water volumes, and I'm talking over 600 litres per hectare. And I think most people are aware of this, but I think they're a little bit misled on why we do it. I think the perception is that applying at 600 litres per hectare will mean the sprayed solution will run off the leaf and down into the soil, meaning we have distributed the application deep through the soil profile. But this is simply not true, Henry. If you were to run a sprayer over some sand with some dye in that sprayer solution and then look at how deep it's gone into the sand, I suggest no matter what the water volume you've used was, whether that be 200 litres per hectare or 1,000 litres a hectare, you'll have hardly gone a millimetre into that sand.
Okay, well that begs a question, doesn't it? So what are we trying to achieve with the different water volumes then?
Well, the water volume is a figure that shows how we've adjusted the various ratios that are in our control on the sprayer. We can change the water volume by going faster or slower. We can change it by increasing or lowering the pressure, and we can also change it by changing the nozzles. Now, when we look at those factors, we actually don't have many adjustments that we can make. Forward speed is always going to be determined by what's safe and efficient around the golf course. Nozzles are only designed to operate between 2 or 3 bar for fine turf, and even though sprayers will allow you to go at a higher pressure, you really shouldn't do it, as you either lose quality through drift if you're too high or coverage if you're too low, which really only leaves us with changing the nozzle.
And how does that impact on things?
So a small orifice nozzle such as an XC025 will give you a high proportion of fine droplets, and fine droplets will sit on the leaf. A large orifice nozzle such as an XC08 will give you a high percentage of large droplets, and large droplets will run off the leaf. When applying a wetting agent, we want as much of the application to run off the leaf into the lower canopy as possible, where it can wait for rainfall or irrigation to wash it into the soil profile. If the product is sitting on the leaf, it runs the risk of being removed by mowers and degrading faster in UV light, and possibly drying on the leaf and not washing off when rainfall does come. So in summary, when applying wetting agents, use a bigger nozzle to change the ratio to more large droplets. That will mean the application runs off the leaf to the lower canopy, where it can wait for moisture to help it reach the target. Do not use higher pressure to achieve this, as it's counterproductive. It creates more fine droplets and it doesn't help it move down the leaf. And make sure you do not drive at a speed that is unsafe. That is important. Use irrigation to move that solution into the soil rather than assuming a high water volume does it.
Very good, Glenn. I get it. So that's it for another month, Glenn.
Yep, plenty going on in March, Henry.
And so I am bound to ask,
Ooh, what's that, Henry?
will the easterlies be harsh, or the ground start to parch, or maybe turn into a marsh? Will we take heart, or should we beware the new moon of March?
How about there was an old man up in Yorkshire who didn't give up when he ought to. He persisted with stuff that wasn't good enough.
And instead of good fun, it was torture. Do you know, Glenn, I think I'm getting the hang of this now.
I'll see you next time, Henry. Goodbye, all.
How about there was a course manager from Nantucket